There is a Solution for That is sponsored by VARC Solutions. VARC Solutions helps small businesses succeed by delivering expert QuickBooks bookkeeping, consulting, quick-base development, and integrated solutions. If you own a small to medium-sized business that uses QuickBooks or QuickBase, the experts at VARC Solutions can help. In business since 1999, with people who care and the knowledge and experience to solve your toughest problems. Visit VARCsolutions.com for all your QuickBooks needs. Welcome back to another edition of There's a Solution for That, where we help small businesses succeed by discussing challenging business problems and best-in-class solutions. All right, welcome everybody to the latest episode of There is a Solution for That, where we talk about business problems and solutions to those problems. We have a great guest today, Reineck from the Era Group, who's going to be talking to us about how to use cost reduction to increase profitability. And so Aaron is an expert in this area, and we really look forward to discussing and strategizing and talking through how business owners and leaders can really use this expertise that you have of cost reduction to make their business more profitable. So Aaron, thanks for joining the call.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for inviting me. I'm glad to be here.
Tell us just a little bit about you before we kind of jump into the content.
Well, I have a long history and background in business. I've been in manufacturing for 40 years and just recently started this endeavor with Era Group. Basically, I'm a consulting partner with Era Group. We offer cost intelligence and cost reduction services to mid-market companies throughout the US and globally. We partner with business leaders, owners, presidents, CEOs, CFOs who are thinking or saying we're concerned about having to reduce headcounts. We need to make strategic investments, but we're not able to fund them. We're frustrated with the lack of cash flow or lack of visibility of all our indirect spending. So we identify areas of indirect overspending, and we advocate for them with their suppliers to significantly reduce costs and add cash flow. We provide insight into their supplier base that they don't have.
That's fantastic. Well, I mean, I know, this is an important conversation, I think, regardless, of what's going on in the economy, because when things are booming, it's still important to be efficient with your money. When things are in decline, it's doubly important to make sure that you're looking at your costs and cutting the things that maybe aren't essential. And if you're trying to scale too, I was at a meeting just a few months ago where they talked about, especially when you're even, looking at an acquisition target, if costs aren't in line, you can't scale because the costs go with it a lot of times. So I'm very fascinated to talk to you about this. So the first question I have for you really is, you mentioned mid-market.
Yes.
At what point should a business be thinking about this in terms of, especially like an engagement with you, where you can really save some money? Is it startup? Is it growth? Is it maturity? At what point does somebody really need to be thinking about this seriously?
Yeah, I would say it's really any time for the most part. I mean, there's challenges with that curve in terms of where the business is. The way that I look at it is all companies are wasting money, and they may not have the visibility to that. So there are always areas of indirect spend or overhead in which there's money that's being left on the table with the client's suppliers. And it's kind of like a game of whack-a-mole. Where can I go and look to find areas to reduce costs that are outside of my core spends, especially if I don't have the knowledge and the expertise into my supplier's business that somebody like Era Group can provide for them. So, the challenge with a startup would be, no basis of information. So we could come in and do a consulting relationship with that client at that stage and just do some investigation and look at the market for them. Typically, we need to have some level of history to be able to go and look, who their suppliers, what have their suppliers been invoicing them over the course of the last year, and then what areas of indirect spend are they overspending in.
Okay. So not so much, so maybe not so much the startup phase,
Yes,
but once they've got a little bit of history and especially if they're growing quickly, I imagine,
yes,
because I can tell you from our experience, when you are growing quickly, things are moving so fast, you don't even have
correct,
time. It feels like I don't even have time to look at all the things because,
correct,
we're too busy working our clients or going out and making sales and
correct.
stuff like that. So I can imagine it does become an afterthought, but in that growth phase, especially, it sounds like is super important.
Well, yeah, growth and on an ongoing endeavor. I mean, the growth
Yeah.
part to your point, the wheels could be you could be going downhill so fast that the wheels are starting to wobble and you just don't know it. So, you've got to focus on the things that you need to acquire to make the business grow.
Hmm.
And this is a great opportunity for somebody like us to come in and deal with the things that are distractions for you, or that may end up getting out of control themselves because you don't have the eyes on those things. You don't have enough resources.
Got it.
For us, we're just, the way I always kind of look at it is we're another arrow in your quiver.
Hmm.
So we're another tool in your tool belt, whatever analogy you want to throw in there.
Perfect.
We can take a lot of pressure off of you, and we can provide a lot of value and insight into things that you can't necessarily see right away. And then,
Okay.
your ongoing endeavor as well. The challenge you may have there is, one of the things we hear is, well, we've got resources that do all that. Well, you've got how many different suppliers on your indirect side of things that you can't possibly have insight into. So there can be a little bit of stagnation there in some of the ongoing
Yeah.
concerns where they just don't look like they used to because of level of comfort.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you kind of big picture because, I always try to think like if I was sitting in the audience or if I'm watching this, like,
Yes.
what are the things that I'm thinking about? Like, what are the things that I'm having questions about? And one of the biggest questions that I have is,
Okay.
especially when you work with clients on
Mhm.
reducing costs and things like that. This is a two-part question. Like, one part is like, what are those common big picture categories of expenses that you consistently see where
Sure.
money is getting wasted? And then
Yes.
really the second part of that question is I'd love for you to define terms a little bit because you mentioned some like core expenses versus, maybe I don't know if I'm using the right word, like non-core, but can you define those for us in terms of how we should be thinking about this?
Okay. Yeah. So, what we focus on primarily are indirect spends. So when we're talking about indirect, we're, talking about general administrative and then overhead spends. So when I mention core, I'm thinking, the company has direct expenditures relative to the goods and services that they have to buy for the goods and services that they produce.
Okay.
And they have a lot of really good eyes on those things for the most part because that's their main focus. They've got procurement teams and groups that are, very well honed and really focus on the supplier base in that area. And since they're inside that industry, they should know that industry pretty well. On the overhead, indirect, G&A side of things, you get a lot of attention when it comes to your high dollar spends, but there's that long tail. There's an example that I've seen that may be a little bit outside of the norm where a company had 2,400 different vendors. This is a billion-dollar year company,
Right.
and they're spending 83% of their spends on their top 40 vendors. So you've got all this long tail that's dragging out there.
Right.
So it's just a tremendous opportunity first to consolidate if possible. The other is to have visibility into those things. So typically what we'll do is, we'll pull the general ledger for a company. We'll analyze the spend categories against our benchmarking data. We've got a tool called SpendView, which is pretty exhaustive. We have a database of roughly 40,000 projects that we've managed over the course of, 32 years. So we can go in and we can say that you're overspending in this category by X percent, or this one by this percent, or this one by that percent. So kind of relative to your question, a little bit more detail. It really depends on the industry. We are industry agnostic. We really do focus on the supplier base. That's the primary thing that we have expertise in, but we do hit some key industries, multi-facility healthcare, manufacturing, higher and private education, not-for-profit organizations that are large, international, national or multinational, retail, wholesale, et cetera. So just looking at a couple of those, I could say for like a manufacturing, packaging, logistics, and insurance would be kind of top three areas that we would really dig into and look at that we have, high degree of probability that there's overspend in those areas.
Okay.
Healthcare, medical supplies, pharmacy,
Okay. So
supplies, insurance, things of that nature. So the
So
categories will define themselves as we do the analysis.
okay, yeah, yeah, totally right. And so I'm just thinking like take one of those examples and like, are we
Right.
talking about things like payroll, benefits, or are we talking about um, uh, sanitation spend? I mean, I don't know. Just I'm sure, like you said, it depends on the industry, but maybe just
Right.
like pick one of those and maybe just kind of give a couple of highlights.
Okay. So we focus on, 8 primary centers of excellence or indirect cost categories. It'd be logistics,
Okay.
banking and financial services, corporate services, medical services, facility management, telecom, technology, operational supplies, etc. So those are like the big 8, and then underneath those, there are literally hundreds of subcategories
Okay.
that we can focus on. So each one of those has their own. I mean, telecom and technology, a big one that we take a look at right now and we help businesses with are, the cloud solutions and service as a software solutions.
Yeah.
Those are big challenges because they're ultra complex. The offerings are wide and varied amongst, providers and suppliers. And oftentimes businesses don't realize that they're getting a package or suite of support or offerings from that one company, that things that they don't even use. They don't even know that they have extra benefits
Yeah.
that are available. They're more than they need. So we try to right size things with those kinds of things. So those would be some examples. So we do everything from, I think I said this to you when we had lunch the other day, but we focus on the everything from the boring and the mundane, which would be your janitorial supplies or office consumables, but there's a lot of opportunity in those things, to the extremely complicated, overseas, freight, logistics, and then kind of going back to that telecom, IT, cloud storage. So
Got it.
everything that's out there, pretty much from an indirect overhead perspective, we have expertise in.
That's awesome. And I guess like the way I can personalize this is when I get the email that has here's your invoice and I don't even know what that is.
Correct.
If I get an email from Microsoft security, blah, 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 whatever, and I'm like, I don't even know what this is.
Right.
That's probably a good time to raise the red flag and at least ask the question, what am I spending this money on? And like, how,
Right.
if I canceled this, what's going to happen? Is
Right. Right.
are the lights going to go off or am I not going to notice at all? And everybody's going to keep going on business as usual. So, um, do you have, to help kind of solidify this for some folks, do you have like maybe a client story, a specific use case where you went in, you did the evaluation, you did the audit, and what you discovered was like, oh my gosh, this is, a gold mine in terms of the business, in terms of recovery of costs and things like that?
Right. Actually, I do. The challenge is I don't know if I have all the numbers correct because it's kind of a work in progress right now. It's
Yeah.
somebody that we're actually engaged with right now. But one of my consulting partners, um, who's been with Air Group for a long period of time, is working with a 4-facility hospital group.
Mm.
And typically, what we do, I mentioned, we'll pull the general ledger and we'll start looking at that information. Then there are also other cost categories that are outside of things that are captured on the GL. But uh, we'll take a look at those things. We'll get into a 4-quadrant situation where we have actionable, discoverable, low ROI, and just non-addressable. So we really focus on that actionable group on the top, and those are the areas where we have a high degree of confidence that we can find savings. And typically in that actionable area, we're looking at, on average, Air Group wide, a 19.7% reduction in costs in those areas. So one example that, kind of going back to that 4-facility hospital group, in that actionable category, we have $3 million of actionable indirect spend.
Mm.
We've engaged with them to work on 5 projects. And out of those 5 projects, 2 of them represent 70% of that $3.2 million
Yeah.
spend. And we're looking at $1 million to $1.2 million annualized savings in those categories by being able to
Wow.
address those things. And primarily, the 2 categories that we're focusing on are their JanSan, janitorial sanitation spend categories, and believe it or not, their language services category.
Hmm.
So I think I mentioned this to you as well, but one of the things that I didn't realize, and this is just kind of shows the level of expertise and the visibility that we have, is the language services is 24/7 on-demand language translation services for the hospitals in 27 different languages. So it is not like you make an appointment with the doctor and they have to have a translator available for you. It's like you show up in the emergency room at 2 a.m. in the morning and you need to have a translator available, online or on the phone right away.
Yikes.
So, and there's a huge savings that we were able to find in that category, realizing that there are other suppliers and other partners in the industry beyond what the client was currently engaged with that can offer better solutions, provide the level of service that they want, and provide the quality that's needed. So just something that I found was truly amazing. I keep discovering things like this
Yeah.
that I had no idea about.
Yeah, language services. I mean, I can just imagine. I used to be involved in a business that did public seminars, and at some
Right,
point, we got an email saying someone that was was deaf. They couldn't hear, and
right,
needed a sign language translator. But that's just like one out of, like you said, 27 plus scenarios that a public organization might be
right,
encountering. So I can imagine schools, hospitals, any place where you've got a lot of people with different nationalities, different languages, that would
right.
be a challenge. So I appreciate that. So it sounds like janitorial services, language services, those are just like some of the highlights. But let me ask you this, because I've got to imagine there's somebody going, okay, this all sounds really good, but how much is this going to
Right,
cost me? I know
right.
you guys have a different model, so maybe kind of explain how your model benefits both of you in terms of what you can find and what you can recover, and tell us a little bit about how that works.
Okay. So basically the discovery that we do up front is all of our hard work and effort. So we have a no savings, no fee model. In other words, we'll engage with the client, we'll pull their general ledger information, we'll come back to them with a situation report. And the situation will report will say, well, it looks like there's the potential for 5 projects together, using that last example.
Mhm.
We believe, and we run a sensitivity analysis, and this is all based on our database benchmarking information, that we can save plus or minus 20% in this category, in this category, this category, in this category. And then once the end client acknowledges that and agrees to move forward, then we enter into a contract with the client. And all of our fees are based off of a percentage of savings relative to that client and relative to that category over a period of time. So that's what's kind of unique about us is, we're not coming in and asking for a large amount of money to do the analysis up front. We're doing a lot of work. We're typically doing anywhere from 6 weeks to 10 weeks worth of work on the front end before we actually engage with the client. We actually contract with them.
Wow.
From our perspective, we're not giving anything away, but we're telling them that there's opportunities in these areas. And if you want to engage with us, and here again, that sensitivity analysis, we try to be as conservative as we possibly can be, because since it's a fee-based process, we don't want to have to make too many adjustments as we go through the process.
Sure.
We want to be fair and transparent and upfront. Another thing that's really unique about us, and I think we talked about this before, but we fill each and every Air Group consultant fills one of 3 or multiples of our 3 primary roles, and that's client engagement. There's engagement program manager, which is basically your project manager. And typically those first 2 roles are performed by the same person. And then we have our service delivery specialists. And that kind of goes back to those 8 centers of excellence and the hundreds of subcategories that we have below it. And it kind of goes back to the example I gave you of the hospital group. In our human capital expertise, service delivery people are the ones that were focusing on the language services, whereas our office consumables, janitorial supplies was the person that was focusing on that. And these people are just spread all over the country, or all even in some instances all around the world, since we are a global company. So that's what's unique about our model is each and every one of our consultants are partnered together in the engagement. We all have skin in the game because we're all independent business owners, but we joint venture together to find the best deal for the client. So whatever's in the best interest of the client is in the best interest for us as well. And then the other thing that we do is we stay engaged with the client typically through a contract period to make sure that there's no slippage or leakage, and that the costs that were identified up front relative to that sensitivity analysis and what we thought it would be are maintained and actually realized. And we make adjustments if there's, indice adjustments or market adjustments or commodity type adjustments, or there's a change in the requirement relative to the good or service that that client is acquiring. We make adjustments to that to be fair to the client, their suppliers, and our partners as well.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Tell me this, because you did talk about different areas, and you also mentioned human capital. So one of the questions that I've
Yes.
got is, and this could be a good or a bad depending on how you perceive it, right? Which is like, is part of what you guys do. Do you ever look at like the staff and like say, hey,
Yeah.
you're spending too much money on payroll, or not the payroll service, but you've got too
Yeah.
many people. Do you guys do that kind of work, or is it more on the supplier side, like you were mentioning?
Yeah, it's on the supplier side. When I say human capital, the kind of human capital that we would be looking at is anything that supports the staff or the employees within the company. That would be the benefits and those kinds of things that we talked
Okay.
about, or any kind of contracted service that's
Okay.
provided for the business. And we go back to kind of what I mentioned at the introduction is your business leader may have a concern about having to reduce headcount and doesn't want to do it.
Right.
So, that's,
Okay.
we're really there to help find cash flow for a business. And, every dollar added to the bottom line, or every dollar saved is worth, exponentially some amount of gross revenue or net profit. So,
Okay.
it's about finding money so you can go and do other things, so you can retain your staff, so you can take on strategic activities and endeavors, um, and
Yep.
so you can find additional cash flow.
I really appreciate you saying that because, again, that's one of those things that it might not be obvious. It wasn't very obvious to me,
Mhm.
in that through the work that you guys do, you can ultimately help a company not have to do layoffs because
Correct.
you're finding savings in other areas. Because I mean, there's part of me that would think, oh, this guy's going to come in and tell me I should, cut my staff, and if I'm the person that's potentially being cut, I probably wouldn't want to do an introduction, right? And that's just like one area that somebody might be concerned about. Tell me
Sure.
like some of the other, objections or concerns that somebody might have in terms of working with a company like yours.
Yeah, so the biggest thing that we find, and that it's a very relational business. So, when we say that we're working with a client or a company, we're actually working with that business leader. We're working with whoever that sponsor is. And, we're trying to solve a problem, and we're trying to relieve pain, and we're trying to provide a benefit to that person and to the stakeholders within the company. Um, So, some of the objectives, they kind of falls into one of two categories. You've got I jokingly say this, you've got FOMO, you've got the folks that have the fear of missing out. In other words, they know that there's opportunity there. They don't have the resources, or they don't know where the resources are, or they know about you and they want to engage. And then you've got the FOFOs, and that's the fear of finding out. And that can be, political sometimes. And that's kind of the
Right.
challenge. The challenge is, if you're engaging with somebody that feels like they've got all their I's dotted and all their T's crossed, um, they don't yet have the visibility into what opportunities are really there. So, it can be one of those things where, a CFO, CXO, whatever category you want to put them in, doesn't want something disclosed that shows that it's a shortcoming
Mm,
on their behalf. In other words, we find significant savings, and their boss says to them, or the board says to them, why did you let this go on as long as you did? So
right.
it's really more a partnering to make sure they understand that we are an extra resource there
Yeah.
for them. We are really an extension of them. We really are a partner with our clients, and that's how I look at it. And the other thing too is, if we're not a good fit for the client, and the client's not a good fit for us, then we just agree to part ways, and keep each other in mind in the future, and move forward. But it really is about developing that relationship, helping somebody out. Typically, you want to help somebody out that knows they're in pain, and if they don't know they're in pain, maybe there's some opportunity to provide a little bit of insight into where there are problems. But it's not
Yeah.
nothing that anybody should take offense to. It's always an opportunity for improvement.
Yeah, I love that. Especially the fofo is what you said, the fear of
Fofo.
finding out. I guess that's
Yeah.
the first time I've heard that phrase. So,
I don't know if
um,
I made that up, but I used that in a LinkedIn posting series a
no, it's
while ago.
great.
But
It's great, and quite frankly, we work with a lot of medium and small businesses, and I have yet to meet one where the person that we're talking to, whether it's the owner, senior leaders, internal accounting staff, what have you, we're not. I've never had a situation where somebody's like, hey, I have free time on my hands to go try to be more efficient. I have free time on my hands to go, poke around and look around at what we're doing and try to optimize what we're doing. They're too
Right.
busy, right? They're just too busy. They've got projects, they've got workloads, they've got emails, they've got all these requirements, demands all the time. It never stops.
Right.
And I can just imagine. I mean, if you're in that situation, you don't have time to look, and double, call all these vendors and say, hey, are we getting the best deal?
Right.
It's like, or compare costs against competing vendors. We
Right.
don't have time. We just don't have time. So I appreciate the fact that you guys are coming in as that additional resource. You're not adding to somebody's burden. You're
Right.
taking some of that stuff off that they, quite frankly, might not ever get to. So I really appreciate that. One question that keeps coming up for me is, I, I personally, and again, this is just my perspective, so I'm curious about yours. Um, to me, there's a couple super relevant times to engage a company like yours. And we already
Right.
talked about like the phases of growth, hey,
Right.
I'm growing, or maybe I'm mature and things are just kind of in a status quo. I'm just running the business. But sometimes we talk about exit strategy. We talk about growing, and then somebody's going to buy you and gobble you up and add you to
Yes.
a larger organization.
Hmm.
I've got to imagine when somebody's considering doing something that like that within a year, 2 years, 3 years,
Right.
reducing costs now is probably a good thing because it'll increase the profitability, which will improve the value of a sale. So tell us about that, or have you seen that type of scenario before?
Yeah, actually, we work a lot in the private equity side of things, exactly as stated, prior to sale and post acquisition. So, prior to sale, the benefit is to make the company's performance, um, their financial statements look better. So
Mm-hmm.
we'll go in, we'll find opportunity, we'll negotiate those things. Sometimes that those take a different approach than a different approach than normal, because the client may not want to engage in extended contract that may impede
Right.
with the sale of the business. So we'll go in, we'll just do a single engagement with a fixed rate relative to that, and then find the savings for them, and then that's good. And then on the back end, once the business is acquired, we can really go in and help people clean things up and get things straightened out, especially when you're merging businesses together. There's a tremendous amount of opportunity for economies of scale and normalizing processes and vendor relationships across multiple entities, if it's a merger of like entities.
Yep.
So really good opportunity in both of those areas, and something that we strive to do. And then from my perspective personally, the other thing that I look at is I'm a connector. So kind of like you and I being connected here, and the things that we look at, um, my number one joy, just personally, is being able to connect people together that need resources in a certain area, business to business.
Yep.
So, if I get involved in those situations, the first thing I start thinking about is, you know, how can I get this person in touch with a resource they may need in this area, whether it's fractional sales and marketing, or QuickBooks support and development and scaling, those kinds of things. So it just, we come in and we really truly look at ourselves, and I don't know if this is trademarked or not, but as trusted advisors. So we
Mm-hmm.
want to partner with somebody, we want to have a long-term relationship with them, whatever level of business we actually end up doing with them, then that's fine. That's kind of speaks for itself, and we can continue to provide and add value. One of the things that I didn't mention is typically we'll go in and we'll do those initial engagements, and we'll stay on. The company will likes us continuing to monitor those things over a longer period of time, or they'll bring other additional projects to us, and then sometimes we do creep into and become involved in direct spend. We've got a lot of strength in chemicals and other raw materials, oil and gas, plastics, and things of that nature. So um, there are tremendous opportunities, and we're advisors to those people in that situation. But kind of getting back to private equity, M&A, there's a tremendous opportunity there for us to help people out there.
That's awesome. And it sounds like just restating something you said, because I think it's worth repeating. And that's it could be very valuable leading up to that, but also a post
Yes.
merger
Yes.
yeah, that's when you're trying to make these two organizations together more efficient. So I think that's a really, really good thing to consider if you've recently gone through an acquisition or a merger. That's really, really smart. So I
Well, post-merger, post-acquisition merger, that's when there's just chaos everywhere.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
you've got to get your strategies together. You have to get your leadership structure
Yep.
strategy together. And these, we can take a tremendous amount of pressure off of people by looking at these areas that, quite frankly, they don't really have the time to do, and it just adds to the fog of war, if you will.
Yep.
So
No, that makes perfect sense.
we can reduce that.
Well, let me ask you this. So
Sure.
again, somebody's listening to this right now, and they're and maybe part of their thinking is I maybe I could benefit from this. Maybe I'm not sure.
Hmm.
If you had just like one simple tip, one simple strategy, one thing as an example of what you guys do, but something they could go try and maybe do on their own too. What would be
Sure.
that one little simple tip or area or strategy that they could implement right now to start saving some money on some of their indirect expenses?
I think the one thing that just pops to mind for me is you can't do it all yourself. So and be open to other avenues for support.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you have to be cautious too, because you don't want a big sales pitch, and you don't want an engagement that doesn't provide value to you in terms of being open to broader things. But from our perspective, we can come in and we can do that initial analysis with no cost. And if there's nothing there to be gleaned, or if there's no desire to work together with the client or us, or vice versa, then there's nothing ventured, nothing gained, no harm, no foul. So
Okay.
my recommendation is don't wait until it's too late. I mean, if you are wasting money right now, that's compounding every single day. I mean, there's a loss every single day, that the longer that it goes on. And then
Okay.
before you know, it can grow into something even worse if you don't have eyes on.
Okay, perfect, perfect. So
Yeah.
the simple step is, hey, pick up the phone, schedule
Yeah,
a free consultation just to evaluate
correct.
and see if this might be a fit. That's perfect, perfect. Well, so let's as we conclude the show. By the way, I really appreciate having you on and kind of sharing some of these insights. If someone wanted to learn more, how do they get a hold of you guys at the Era Group?
Well, it is eragroup.com, so that's the main website. I think I'm the one and only Aaron Reinick on LinkedIn.
You
So
probably are, Aaron
I,
Reineck.
I'm pretty easy to find. So just look up Aaron Reinick on LinkedIn. I've got uh, a kind of a cyclical presence there. I mean, I'm out there, and I've got a fair amount of content. I don't post as often as I would like to, but there's a lot of stuff going on. So, and
Okay.
then my email address is areineck@eragroup.com. I don't know if people see the spelling of my name
Yeah.
or not, but it's areineck@eragroup.com. So for a direct connection, or a DM through LinkedIn.
Yeah, yeah, and you can always reach out to me too, and I can connect you as well. And so I'm gonna do the listeners a favor, because the spelling of your name is a little bit challenging, if they're just listening. And so that's Aaron, Aaron, and then
Correct.
Reineck is
Correct.
Reinick. So if you're looking for Aaron on LinkedIn, check him out. Era Group again. Aaron, just so thank you so much for coming on the show. Really enjoyed
Sure
having
thing.
you.
Thank you, Brad.
And for those of you that are watching or listening, really appreciate you tuning in, subscribing, and hope again that this was valuable to you. It's something to consider if you're not, if you are thinking, hey, I could be saving some money. So that's part of what we try to do here, is just really, like you said, Aaron, making connections to people that might be of value to other people. So if you're listening, hope this was a good episode for you, and look forward to seeing you next week. There is a Solution for That is produced by VARC Solutions. This episode was produced by Ashley White and Aaron Riley. You can subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Watch the video version on youtube.com/There's a Solution for That. Or visit varcsolutions.com/podcast, where you'll find our entire podcast archive, as well as show notes, links to solution providers, and complete transcripts of every episode. If you love the podcast, please leave a review with your comments.